Welcome to the Vendetta Sports Media Daily Show. It is Friday, and we are here to talk UFC. And it has been a busy, busy week in the MMA world, and that gives us a lot to talk about today. So, the docket for today is UFC 294. Obviously, everyone has seen the massive shakeups to that card, the main event, the co-main event. We're leading off with that. And then we're going into the USADA and UFC drama. And we're ending it off with our typical preview for tomorrow's card. So that is the slate for today. Jerry, how you feeling on this great Friday? We're here to talk fights, and we have a lot of news to break down today.
Oh, yeah. We all thought, as we said before this show, we got kicked off. I was expecting some drama in this card, knowing the four guys involved in the main and co-main events. I didn't think it was going to be a week ahead. I thought it was going to be during the fight week. Maybe see some fights get cut out and all that stuff, or some catch weights. Now I think this card might have just gotten even better. No, we're going to go into much more depth on it next week's episode, but just touching on what's happened here, it's crazy. Last weekend's fights, pretty fun for the most part. Nothing too crazy. I was stunned to see Bobby Green come out and do that. I'll just put that out there. Win in 30 seconds, but got some good action, some good drama on the card today. So how are you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing pretty good. And like you said, last week's fights, we had some good fights, whether it be Bobby Green in the main event, shocked a lot of people, including both of us. Joe Pfeiffer, good showing in the co-main event. Unfortunately, the UFC decided to go scorched earth, and we don't really have a lot of time to talk about
No.
last week's fights, because if we talk about last week's fights, tomorrow's fights, all the news, I think we'd be here for 4 hours probably. Unfortunately, as fun as that may be to break down all that. Yeah. So let's jump right in here to the UFC 294 main event. So the main event, we originally had Charles Oliveira. Charles pulls out with a cut on his eyebrow. He posted some pictures of said cut, and it was pretty bad. I mean, it was practically the length of his eyebrow. So that was not something that he could fight with or fly with. So we have Alexander Volkanovski stepping in for his rematch with Islam Makhachev, and if he gets the win next weekend, he will be a double champ, the fifth double champ in MMA history. So, Jerry, what is your initial reaction to this main event getting flipped up, and all of a sudden we've got Alexander Volkanovski in on just 11 days' notice?
I mean, I'll start with the Oliveira side of things. Like you said, that cut looked nasty. I haven't done much fighting in the past or any of the training, so I'm kind of maybe a little questioning, but like, why are you going such hard 5 round sparring? I know it's the day before you fly out there. I feel like you'd want to take that day easy, get out there, and then maybe do a little bit more sparring. Feels like kind of bad management by the Brazilian team. And either way, whatever happens, happens. I'm glad we get in this Volk rematch instead. I fear that Oliveira would have probably gotten smothered just like he did in that first fight. It would have been relatively easy for Islam. Whereas we saw Volkanovski fight in Australia against Islam earlier this year, and that was one of the better fights of the year. Definitely could have gone really either way. Islam, I think, rightfully won that fight, but there are a lot of people calling for Volk to be the winner and become the double champ. Now we get to see it again. And there's only a certain group of people that'll take a fight like this on 11 days' notice, and Volkanovski's one of those guys. For me, it's if he does manage to get this done, now he's going into enemy territory, 11 days' notice. If he manages to get it done, this might be his the peak. I don't know if it'd necessarily be the peak, but this throws him right into that GOAT conversation, in my opinion, if he comes back 11 days' notice. And the thing between him and Islam is Islam hasn't fought since Volkanovski, since that fight. Volk's at least gone out and beat Yair Rodriguez to unify the featherweight division. Looks very, very good doing so. And he knows what he has to do against Islam. He's fought him before this year. It's just one of those fights that I'm just excited for it. And I think it makes the main event so much better.
Yeah, I think this is a great fight as well. And as I'll just quickly touch on the Charles side as well. Feel bad for the guy, just because he also was in a position where he could have potentially got the immediate rematch. But he went out there and fought Dariush and earned the rematch, so it does kind of suck for him to lose that, considering he earned it. And also, I don't know whether he wasn't wearing headgear in sparring. Maybe it's the type of headgear he was wearing. So there are some questions with the management as well, like you brought up. But as far as Volkanovski goes, I like the point you made about the amount of people that are willing to do this is small, and there are people who are willing to do this, but the example I think of is Michael Bisping stepping in to fight Luke Rockhold. I think it's a comparable example for a title fight, but the difference in that situation is, you know, Michael Bisping was not a number one contender. A lot of the times when these situations arise, it's guys who may not be there to fight for the title at that time. For example, Dustin Poirier said they called him and he accepted. Dustin is in a point in his career where he's not a number one contender right now because he's coming off a loss. Max Holloway stepped in on short notice to fight Habib Nurmagomedov. Obviously, that fight was also scrapped, but he stepped in on days' notice because he was the 145 champ and he was skipping the line at 155 pounds. So there are examples in the past, but this was like something that Volkanovski had already earned, right? He already earned this rematch, in my opinion. And I think that adds another element of like he's willing to do this, and that I think is what makes it the most special, in my opinion.
Yeah, I'm wondering how much he's been training recently. I'm sure I mean, when you're pound for pound number one, you're training every day and doing that kind of stuff. And I'm wondering how much he was kind of training for maybe an Islam-esque fight, just in case something fell through and he needed to call up. Because I know, like you said, Call reached out to Poirier, who accepted. I heard they reached out to Justin Gaethje. He wasn't in condition and ready to fight. So respect to him for not stepping in while he's unprepared, because that could have gone badly as well. Guy who I do feel a little bit for is Mateusz Gamrot, because he was set up as the main event backup. He was going to be out in Abu Dhabi. If something fell through in fight week, he was going to be the guy up. Now it's just a little outside of the fight week, and they're pretty much like, yeah, sorry, we got someone else we want to fight him instead. Thank you for your time, but better luck next time.
Yeah, I do feel for Gamrot as well, and he is like in a position where he kind of got screwed just because he is the backup, but they had time to pull in another guy despite the fight falling through. Like if this would have happened, like we originally talked about, being like a weigh-in thing where one guy misses weight, then he's in. Maybe if this happens 2 days before, he's in, but it happened 11 days before, so he doesn't get that opportunity. And I do feel for him, and he's probably still in a position where he still has to go and make that weight, knowing he's not going to fight and knowing he didn't get the opportunity after the fight fell through. So I do feel for him in that regard because he was even willing to make the sacrifice to go out there and be the backup fighter.
Yeah.
And this is, I guess, the one thing that I don't like about this fight is I wish Volkanovski had a full camp to prepare. Um, because we saw what he did the last time with the full camp. He had a great game plan and he made a lot of great grappling advancements in his career, in a skill set with the time to prepare, and he was training with great grappler Craig Jones. So that's the only thing I don't like about this fight, is that it feels like maybe Volkanovski may underperform with that short of a time to prepare in comparison to the great things he did when he had 3 months. So that's my only concern, is that we may fall short of what could be a great fight just because Volkanovski comes in slightly underprepared when he's a guy on a full camp. He might be the last guy that I ever expect to come into a fight underprepared.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like you said right there, we saw him with a full camp in February and came very, very close to upsetting the lightweight champion, which it's going to be interesting to see how it goes this time. I am probably leaning to Islam, but those betting odds last time I saw like plus 230, 250 in that range. I might sprinkle some on Volkanovski there, because if anyone's going to come in on this short of notice in this big of a fight and pull out the win, I think Volkanovski would be that guy to do it.
Mhm.
My other question is what's going to happen with the featherweight division? Because it was sounding like the first pay per view of the year of next January was going to be Alexander Volkanovski taking on Ilya Topuria. Now that fight's probably thrown into kind of shambles because unless Volk comes out and wins easily and doesn't really get beat up at all or touched, he's not going to be ready and healed enough in time for that fight.
Yeah. We will touch on Trey's question here real quick. We're gonna preview that later. That's the last thing we're talking about. So if you want some more in depth, we'll touch on it then. But just for right now, I think the main event's a good one between Sadiq Yusuf and Edson Barbosa. I really like that fight. Co-main Jennifer Maia, Viviane Araujo. Not the greatest fight, but the fight before that, Jonathan Martinez, Adrian Yanez, that fight I think is good. So
Yeah.
also, yeah.
I want to just say the one I'm looking forward to is that Michael Pereira and Andre Petrovsky, just because Pereira is one of those entertaining guys that just throws crazy shots everywhere.
Yeah, so this card isn't like you don't have a bunch of top five going against each other, but I think we've got, quite a few ranked guys and quite a few guys who are fun. So, and Trey was also, you said that guys should be forced to go up a weight when they miss weight, or something along those lines. I think he added some details, but Michel Pierre, when he missed weight for the Thompson fight, forced to go up to 185 now. So they did push him up that weight class, like we kind of talked about in the UFC chat. So, back to 294. As far as Volkanovski goes, it does suck that he's going to come in a little unprepared. And that was my only hesitancy with this fight. I really wish he would get that full camp, but he could have said no and still got the fight at a later date, probably. And as far as that 145 belt goes, personally, I think Volkanovski, as long as he's healthy, he's going to still make that walk. Because he's a guy who has already, this will be his third fight this year. And we're looking at, that I think it was going to be the 20th or the 23rd or something like that. So it's at the end of January. It's not like it's the first week of January. So I think that Volkanovski is going to go in there and make that fight happen as well. That's my prediction, just because we've seen his willingness to fight. The one thing about Volkanovski is all he's asked for is to fight. Like, there was a point in time where he went up to 155 because 145 was out of contenders and he didn't want to wait for the next one to step up. That's why he originally went up to 155. So I think this is a point in time where he's going to see his contender at 145 and he's going to get that fight. Or maybe they just do some workaround and maybe they try and get Sugar Sean on the January card and push this back to February. Maybe something like that. But I still think Volkanovski will make the walk in January, barring big injuries or big cut.
Yeah, I mean, this is why I'd be excited for him to be a double champ with what you said of how active he is. I think we've seen in the past when McGregor became a double champ, he vacated one division, went up to the other, didn't really even defend his belt much there. Amanda Nunes, double champ. Featherweight division really wasn't even that much of a thing. So it wasn't like she was defending both back and forth. I think if Volk won the lightweight belt next weekend at 294, he would be kind of switching back and forth between divisions, and I think he would try his best to defend both as much as he could. For this, though, in terms of the featherweight picture, I do agree with you in the fact that I think Volk, barring major injury, will be fighting Topuria in his next time out. I wouldn't mind, though, if they did decide to do an interim belt, given Max Holloway and Ilya Topuria. It seems like every title challenger and contender in the featherweight division in the last few years has had to fight Max Holloway at some point. He either knocks him down, finishes him like he did Arnold Allen, or he might struggle a bit and it looks like, oh, now we have another contender. In this one, Topuria hasn't really fought him, hasn't fought Yair to my knowledge. He got the belt off what? Beating Josh Emmett, or a shot at the belt for beating Josh Emmett.
Yep.
I wouldn't mind him being tested against one of these other guys. Sure, I think he probably would win, but Max Holloway is Max Holloway for a reason. And he's been that number one contender for so long now. Doesn't matter what's happening elsewhere, that would be an intriguing fight to me, and then make the unification bout at featherweight later on, maybe early in the summer.
Mm-hmm. My only issue with that is if we're doing that, we also have to say that Max Holloway gets a title shot
Yeah,
if he beats
right.
Ilya Topuria.
Unless
That
he,
is just the way the UFC interim belt works, and that's my only hesitancy with that fight. Um, and it doesn't seem, maybe we decide, hey, if Max Holloway beats the Korean Zombie and Ilya Taporia, that gets him a fourth chance at Volk. But we have to make that decision, or the UFC rather has to make that decision before they book Max and Taporia. That's not to say Taporia can't win, because the flip side of that risk is Taporia beating Max, and if he beats Max Holloway, that 145 unification bout between Taporia and Volkanovski, with Taporia coming off a win over Max Holloway, will be a highly anticipated bout. Probably more anticipated than the Volk and Yair fight, at least. I mean, it would have to be if he beats
yeah,
Max. So you're kind of playing that risk and reward, and maybe it's worth it, maybe it's not. I can see both sides of the argument, but I just think that the UFC would have to be ready to make that Max and Volk fourth fight if that's something that they want to do, which in the past they did not seem to bullish on. Maybe a win over Taporia really changes their mind, which if it does, it does. If not, I can understand why, honestly.
yeah. And I mean, that was the good point you made right there. That is like we don't really necessarily need a fourth fight between Holloway and Volk because just in the case that say Holloway does win, we probably will get a fifth, and then
Mm-hmm.
who knows what happens after that because they're not gonna. They kept giving Holloway rematches against Volkanovski despite losing. If Volk loses, I think he would have to get a rematch in that. So that does throw the whole division into kind of chaos at times. But I do just think that would be an entertaining fight one way or another. That's part of my thoughts on it is that would be a good fight, good test for Taporia to see how he is against those top 3 or 4 guys in the division.
I 100% agree with that. Like if we're sitting here on a Friday with Max and Taporia coming up on a Saturday, that's about as good of a fight as you can make from like an anticipation perspective and like a skills perspective. Like how is this going to play out? I think that's like such a fun fight. So I agree with that aspect of it. The last thing that I want to touch on as far as the main event goes before we move down to the co-main is Charles Oliveira is out with this cut, and we have Justin Gaethje, who has earned a title shot with the win over Dustin Poirier. How do you think the UFC approaches that, assuming Islam wins? If Volkanovski wins, the conversation changes because now you're looking at maybe a trilogy there a couple months down the line after he fights at 145. But assuming Makhachev wins, just for the point of discussion, and we don't have to wind in too many hypotheticals, but who do you think should get the next fight, Charles or Gaethje?
That's
It's a tough question in my opinion. That's why I ask.
no, it is definitely a tough question because I mean, both of them deserve it, clearly do. The issue there becomes Islam's not the most active. We've seen that this year. He's fought twice, once in February and now once in late October. If he continues like that, it's what 6 months in between. He would fight October and then probably not again until what, March or April, maybe at the earliest. By then, both of them will have probably wanted a fight again. If Gaethje's not a guy to sit back and wait. He was another active guy. Oliveira tends to be more on the active side, but always has the issues around him. I think back to the Gaethje and Oliveira fight and how one-sided that was. So maybe that would be where I'd lean to Oliveira a bit. But at the same time, we saw Islam already beat Oliveira. And correct me if I'm wrong, he hasn't fought Justin Gaethje yet.
Correct.
But there's that aspect of it. Do you want to give Oliveira another shot against a guy that demolished him? Or do we give it a new challenge and throw Justin Gaethje out there? Regardless of that, I do think Islam would beat both of them. We saw the Oliveira fight, and every time Gaethje's lost in recent times, it's either been Habib or Oliveira getting his back and choking him out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a tough matchup because the one problem I have with Justin Gaethje's game is I've always thought that, and we don't have to go too in depth and previewing a fight that may never happen, but the one problem I've always had is that I feel like he has great takedown defense, college wrestling background, but once he gets to the ground, oh, but it feels like he hasn't worked much on jiu-jitsu because he's had such rock solid takedown defense that he didn't plan on needing to have good submission defense. So that's just one problem I've had with Gaethje's game, and that's nitpicking a fighter who is a great fighter. But yeah, that's why I asked the question, because I do think it's difficult, and I can see both sides. I think that's one where you give it to Gaethje, I'm glad to see the new matchup. If you give it to Charles, he beat Gaethje, so it's like either way, I think we have a good fight on our hands. So I
Knowing
see both sides of the argument.
knowing UFC math, what would happen is Gaethje would ultimately beat Islam if they fight. Because then just complete that circle of Gaethje beats Islam, Islam beats Oliveira, Oliveira beats Gaethje. Just feel like that's the kind of
Yep,
chaos that's happening.
and then it becomes 10 times more complicated when we try to figure out what fight to book
Who's
next.
next? Exactly. But this is why we like the UFC. Always hypotheticals, and
Yeah.
this could happen one way or another. It's love of the sport.
Yep. And then kind of moving on to the co-main event, which we're going to talk about titles here in a second as far as the co-main event goes. But first, Paulo Costa out with an elbow injury. And you never know with Paulo Costa. You really don't. You don't know if he's kidding. You don't know if he's serious. You don't know if it's his fault because he did something dumb, or you don't know if it's he got unlucky and actually had to have surgery. Um, he got infected, and I really don't know what happened with this fight, but I am very disappointed that this Paulo and Hamzat fight fell through. I thought this was going to be a great fight. I wanted to see Hamzat fight a guy that's bigger for the weight class and see how he stacked up against a guy at middleweight who's a big middleweight. And he's been fighting at welterweight. Now we have a new fight with Kamaru Usman stepping in on 11 days notice, and this is probably even crazier than Volk stepping in on 11 days notice. There's no titles on the line, but Kamaru Usman is going up a weight class. He's already cemented his legacy as an all-time great, and he decided, hey, send me right up to 185 and I'll fight your top prospect that's been absolutely running through everybody. And he's the guy that nobody wants to fight. I'll fight him. I think this is one of the biggest BMF moves we've seen in a very long time.
Oh yeah, and it's not only like it's in Hamzat's case. It's not like he's a guy who's been dominating the middleweight division. This would be his first fight there. He's been dominating the division that Kamaru Usman had been champion of for a long, long time. That just shows that extra level of oh my, and the BMF side of stuff. It's he's going in to fight this guy that's just been destroying your division. I like the move by Usman. He really doesn't have anything to lose. Like you said, his legacy is already pretty cemented. If he comes out and beats Hamzat on 11 days' notice, moving up a weight class that Hamzat's been preparing to fight at that weight class for a little while, it seems, my. I know this is a question you'll bring up at some point, but does that grant him a title shot? It's that sort of stuff in this fight. Well, I know we'll get into that in a bit, but there's all these questions surrounding it of like what happens if Kamaru does come in and just beats Hamzat, because I don't think anyone really expects him to at the moment.
Yeah, like when I look at this fight, I think that the deck is stacked against Kamaru a little bit, and I don't think it really helps that Kamaru has shown signs of regression. And I say that with all due respect, but his third fight with Leon, he didn't look as good as even the second fight with Leon. And if you want to go back further and compare it to other performances, that's a whole nother discussion. But just looking from 2 fights ago to 1 fight ago, you see a clear drop off. I don't know if it's the head kick. I don't know if it's he's 36 and he's been competing at a high level for a long time. He's got well documented knee issues. So I think it's a culmination of things. But that's not things that you like to see when you're walking in to fight Hamzat Chimaev at a new weight class. So that's my concern here for Usman. And the one thing that I'll say that I don't like about this fight is that I really wanted to see Hamzat against a middleweight.
Mm-hmm.
And it does sound like Kamaru is moving to middleweight permanently from what I understand, which makes a level of sense considering how backed up that 170-pound
Yeah.
weight class is right now. Like that's a mess to work with in itself. So it makes a level of sense in that regard, and he is getting a title shot if he wins. Both guys are. The winner will get a title shot. Um, but I still would have. I like seeing guys who are going up a weight class fight middleweight, so we know what they look like against the middleweight. But I still love this fight. But if I'm poking holes, that's the one hole I have here.
No, I'm with you on that. It would have been, and that's what excited me about the Costa fight because, like you said earlier, Costa's a big guy for the middleweight division. Hamzat's been the big guy in the welterweight division, kind of ragdolling people left and right, using his significant strength advantage on him and his ground game. He would have been probably the smaller guy if he faced Costa, and it would have been a relatively noticeable difference that would have been tough to see what happens and would have been more intriguing than anything. Now that fight fell through. There were a couple other names that I was like, oh, okay, that would make sense maybe for a fight. Obviously, the Dricus du Plessis whole situation, maybe someone like that. Or the one I was looking at more like, if you give me that, sign me up. I don't care. You could just have those two fights, and I would watch every second of it. To hell with everything else on the card. Is if they gave Robert Whitaker. I don't know if don't think he has a fight lined up soon, but that would be one hell of an introduction to the middleweight division for Hamza, is facing the guy who's been the number one contender for the better part of the last 3 years.
Yep, that's a great fight. Cannonier would have been a great fight as well, in my opinion. There's a lot of ways that they could have done this for the middleweight division, but um, when I was looking at this, there's the way that I was thinking was all right. So let's get into this title fight a little bit, and or the winner's going to get a title shot. And I've been critical of the way that Duplessis has handled his number one contendership since beating Whitaker, and I thought it would have been an opportunity for him to step up and take this fight, knowing that if Hamzat Chimaev wins, he's going to skip you in line. And I just felt like that was kind of evident that a Hamzat Chimaev win would result in Hamzat skipping Duplessis in line for a title fight. And now we have Dana saying that that is the case. So what do you make of the whole title fight situation with Duplessis? And now the winner of this fight is going to skip Duplessis as far as fighting for a title goes.
I'm honestly not opposed to it. Duplessis kind of dropped the ball in a big way. Sure, he might have been a little hurt going into had he gone into that Izzy fight, but we've seen guys go into fights for the belt with much less because you're not guaranteed another option or another chance. And this is exactly why. Something falls through, suddenly we have this big fight, winner gets the title fight, you're kind of screwed. And I mean, I think Izzy has possibly a better shot of getting a title fight before Duplessis. I think it was really just that storyline between him and Izzy of that's why he's going to get the title shot, and it was a new face. Now we have Sean Strickland as the champion. Everybody's pretty much a new face for him. So I think Duplessis is kind of shot himself in the foot, and now it's really coming to event. And had he stepped up and fought Hamzat, rightfully so, winner gets that title shot. If he was to go out and fight maybe like an Izzy or something, possible title fight after that, and if he wins. But now at this point, he doesn't have a fight lined up. His last one was beating Robert Whitaker, which he did. Don't get me wrong, he looked good in that. But I like the winner of this getting a title shot. I think it's going to be interesting, and I would have been interested to see had Izzy stayed the champion, and this fight and all this situation had happened. Would say Kamaru Usman move up and still fight this kind of fight? Because obviously him and Izzy are friends. So that would have put a whole nother ring into it. But I think it's more on the side of if Hamzat wins, which I think they think he is, it's the same thing we saw with Alex Pereira. Moves up, gets a win over a guy who's a contender. Obviously, it's Kamaru Usman and not Paulo Costa. But still, just shoot your prospect up, have him try and fight for the belt and see what happens.
Yeah, and this is the UFC putting Hamzat in a position to go fight for a belt if he wins. But at the same time, if Usman wins, all of a sudden you've got Usman coming off a win over Chimaev, and you can sell the title fight real easy.
Yeah.
Like, even if they don't get their expected or preferred outcome, however you want to look at it, they go, okay, well, now we've got Usman coming off a win in a new weight class. Like, that is in itself in a great position. We got a comment here Volk goes off on Islam in first round and then gas out in round 2 and gets TKO'd or gets KO'd. I don't know if you're saying Volk gets gasses out or Islam gasses out and gets KO'd, but personally, I struggle to see Volk gassing out in a fight. He's just always been a guy with great cardio. So, um, but back on the co-main event here, yeah. As far as the title goes, Usman wins. You got a title shot. It works out well. Hamzat wins either way. And from a marketing perspective,
Yes.
imagine the scenes of Sean Strickland versus Hamzat Chimaev at a press conference.
Oh, wow.
That fight would do the numbers that fight would do in the build-up and on social media, just of what those two would say, how that press conference would go. That would be something for the books.
Yeah, and that's part of the UFC's thing is sure they have to have good fights, but it's also the promotion and the build up and getting people excited for the fights. That's what I'm looking at for 296. Leon Edwards, Colby Covington, oh my God, Ian Gary's fighting, so he's going to talk his talk. Vicente Luque, Wonder Boy, so that's going to be one of those press conferences. Plus Paddy Pimblett and Tony Ferguson, they're all talkers as well. So that kind of thing. Fights might not be the most exciting on paper, but it's all that buildup that's going to get people excited for him, and that's something that would happen if it was Sean Strickland and Hamzat Chimaev because they both like talking the talk and back it up pretty well.
Yep, I'm with you. All right, moving on to the drama, I think is probably the best way to describe it, between USADA and the UFC. So to quickly summarize these events for everyone watching, and this got complicated quick, so I'm going to do my best here. But on Monday or Tuesday, USADA puts out a statement and says Conor McGregor is back in the pool, and the UFC has told us that we're going to part ways. We're not going to extend our contract. And USADA released a statement, and the wording of the statement was very petty. And USADA was very adamant that USADA was trying to take the high ground for not letting Conor fight without being in the pool for 6 months. Mm-hmm. And then Dana White comes out and says, hey, that statement, scumbag move. That was a scumbag move by USADA. Then we have a press conference held by UFC Chief of Business Officer, I believe his title is, Hunter Campbell. He's basically the number 2 to Dana White. And Jeff Nowitzki, who I don't remember his official title, but he is the health guy for the UFC and oversees drug testing and things like that. He's the guy who, here's your jacket for 50 clean tests. That's what he does. Now, Nowitzki and Hunter Campbell were very upset because they felt like USADA was smearing Conor McGregor, treating him unfairly, and basically they were using Conor to push a narrative that USADA was an organization that would thrive for clean competition. But the UFC's counterpoint was, hey, we were never going to let him fight without being in the pool for 6 months. Conor knew that. Everybody knew that, and you're making it seem like we were trying to skip around the rules and making us look bad and making Conor look bad, making us look like we're trying to cheat the system, which we were not. So there have been a ton of public statements between these two, and I don't know what we're going to see going forward. The only difference is the UFC is basically going to have a new organization that drug tests the athletes on January 1st. So, Jerry, what's your reaction to seeing this UFC and USADA beef and how this got fairly messy between two organizations, two agencies? It's not even like two people got messy and got drama. It's two legitimate organizations.
I mean, to an extent, it seems kind of childish. I'm still kind of confused on the exact details for certain things, and in terms of what's happening next is more kind of my question. I know there's the drug.
I think it's Free Drug Sport is the new
sports, free drug free sports or something like that is taking over. I don't know how that's going to happen, but it feels like everything on the UFC side is, oh yeah, no, we're not actually having McGregor fight. McGregor knows it. Dana knows it. The entire organization knows it. USADA seemed to have missed that message, and they're like, "Oh no, we're not doing that. You can't now." And now with them bouncing out, my big question is obviously like the what happened next, but it's is there a world where we could see McGregor go into USADA until January, then there be that blank period where there is no like testing sort of thing? Or I don't know if the drug free sports is going in immediately on January 1st, how that's working. But could there be a period where we see like, okay, there you go. Suddenly these guys are juiced up for a week. Some crazy stuff could happen. I mean, McGregor might just be able to skip out and be like, oh, he was kind of not grandfathered into the USADA pool, but he's been doing it for that long. Did a couple tests in the between, and now he's able to fight in January. Which I do still feel like now that depending on the Volkanovski and Islam result and how Volkanovski feels, that's a very possible thing to have McGregor and Chandler potentially on that January pay per view headlining it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the interesting thing, one of the things that USADA said was, we hope that the UFC recognizes our 6-month testing policy. So USADA's policy is you stay in the pool for 6 months, you're eligible to fight. The thing that I don't know is if does drug free sport have a testing pool? Is, maybe they use different verbiage. Do they have that same rule that you have to be tested 6 months before competition? Because if drug free sport comes in and says, hey, we only need 4, then Conor can fight, right? And drug free sport is going to take over on the 1st. I don't know what the process is going to look like. I know USADA is going to continuously test athletes until the end of the year, and the UFC does have a nice little leeway here for this transition, because they usually don't do cards the last 2 weeks of December and the first 2 weeks of January, give or take. So they do have that nice little buffer zone where the new company will have 2 weeks to get going. But yeah, if I wonder what, that's the thing that I don't know, is what are drug-free sports policies, because under USADA kind of needs to wait 6 months, which puts him, I think, around April or May, somewhere in there. And if drug-free sport doesn't have the same policies, that changes quickly. And one of the things that the UFC was upset about, and one of the things that they talked about, was how they felt like USADA's technology was falling behind, which I found interesting. And maybe free sport comes in and says, well, our tests are better, so you don't have to be in the pool for 6 months. We'll be able to tell if you were, we'll be better at picking up things in your system, which, once again, I'm not a, scientist. So, I'm not a, health major or anything like this. So it's a little bit hard to get too in the weeds here, but I do think we're in a period where there's a lot of questions regarding Conor and regarding the new policies. I'm interested to see how they play out.
Yeah, it's the whole situation's messy, and I feel like after 8 years they've been working together, something is eventually gonna pull them apart. And of course, it's involving Conor McGregor. The UFC's, I would still say he's still the face of the UFC, even though it might be changing a little bit. I don't think there's a star as big as him in the sport. Maybe John Jones, but a lot of people don't know about John Jones like they do McGregor because of his long period of inactivity. But it's gonna be. I'm very interested to see what happens in the next week or so. Plus, they had all that stuff with, as we were saying earlier, all the fights falling through and all that. So it wasn't like this was necessarily the front of mind, biggest thing to fix at that moment. So maybe in the upcoming weeks, we'll hear more about it and more of the details on one, what has happened, why it really, really fell through, and two, the policies of drug-free sport upcoming.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the UFC offices had a busy week. I can only imagine being one of the top officials trying to deal with USADA putting out a statement that makes you kind of look crappy, and having 2 massive fights fall through, with your next pay-per-view being in danger, having to juggle those the same time. I don't envy the stress that probably came with that. So we may see some more details soon, and maybe Conor McGregor wasn't the only thing that split these two apart. Maybe we learn some more soon. All right. That is our cap of the news section. Usually we don't have 40 minutes of news. Usually we have, hey, we had one fight book, or hey, we had one guy get cut, or one thing happened. Well, today we had a large chunk of news. Um, Moving on to this weekend's card, we have a solid fight night card, and we touched on it a little bit. We'll go a little bit more in depth. And now, UFC Vegas 81 headline: Sadiq Youssef, Edson Barbosa. Jerry, what are your thoughts here on the main event?
I mean, just off name power alone, like this main event has me excited. Two ranked guys in oh my, I want my blank. Two ranked guys in the featherweight division. Yusuf at 11, Barboza at 13. Both kind of, I'd say, veterans of the game. Sadiq Yusuf is 7 years younger, but he still has a lot of fights in the UFC and has been there for quite what feels like quite a long time. Only one loss in the UFC, so that's he's kind of on the up and up still. That one loss was to Arnold Allen, who we've talked about potentially being a future a future title challenger in this division in the first place. So it's not like it's a bad loss. Went the decision. He's now come out 2 wins in his last 2 fights, got a submission in his last time out. Whereas Barbosa, he's 37. I feel like he's been fighting for a very, very long time. He's fought some of the toughest dudes in the lightweight division, now moved down to the featherweight division. He kind of fights anyone and everyone and never seems like he has a dull fight, even if his recent record hasn't proven his success, or he only has 4 wins in about his last 11 fights.
Yeah. And the thing about Edson Barbosa, like, even if you look at the record and see a lot of red, it's like he knocked out Billy Quarantillo with the knee in his last fight and put him out cold. It's like win or lose, Edson Barbosa is still insanely dangerous, insanely quick, insanely powerful. Like, even if he's at a point in his career where he has to I think he's at a point where he has to depend a little bit more on explosiveness and one-shot KOs and things like that. Like, yeah, that may not be the best way to rattle off, 5 wins and get a title fight. But man, that is an exciting style for fans, and it's still insanely fun to watch, in my opinion. And on the other hand, you're looking at a guy in Sadiq Youssef, I mean, he fights insane too.
Yeah.
For my money, he's got one of the best fights of all time on Dana White's Contender Series. Went to absolute war with Mike Davis.
Mm-hmm.
And Sadiq Youssef, the thing about him is he constantly moves forward. He pressures you, he throws big shots, he's in your face, he's kicking your leg, he's hitting you hard. And just that style of forward pressure paired with Barbosa's striking and Barbosa's knockout power, like, that is a fun matchup in my opinion, and I think could yield an exciting fight, even if it may not be the longest. Maybe we're only here for 1 round, 2 rounds, maybe 3 rounds at the most, but I think it's going to be an exciting fight for as long as it lasts.
Oh yeah, it's definitely one that I would think will end in a finish, but both these guys do go to decisions relatively often, at least at this point recently. My big question for Sadiq Youssef, though, is it's been over a year since he's fought. It might be a little rust coming into the octagon, and that fight only lasted 30 seconds in its own right. So he's had 30 seconds of fight time in a little over a year and a half, which we've seen guys come back from long layoffs. Sure, it isn't necessarily a long layoff because he did fight, but like I said, it wasn't very long. Or I'm not quite sure what kind of guy we're going to be seeing coming into the octagon against a guy like Barbosa that last time fought in April. So
Yeah, that's a good point. And like Don Chanis, I believe, has been cut from the organization since that fight. He was the guy they found on the regional scene to take that fight on short notice, and he then lost to Jack Jenkins, I believe, and got cut. So it's not like he went out there against the strictest level of competition, and he fought Chanis because I believe it was Giga pulled out. So Sadiq has been a guy who's struggled to get fights, and he's struggled to have opponents stay in fights. And that's just unlucky on his part. It feels like I don't think that's necessarily his fault. And he's a guy who I imagine the UFC wants to have fighting regularly because he can have these fights like Barbosa and be entertaining. So I think this is an interesting matchup. Yeah, go ahead.
I do want to throw one other thing. From the research I was doing, it looks like these two were meant to fight in 2020. And then obviously everything kind of happened. Yusuf pulled out because it was an October card, and here we are 3 years later, almost to the date that they're finally getting in the octagon together. So it's been a fight that's been in the works for 3 years, and now we're finally getting it. So I think that adds a little bit of extra to it.
Yeah. And it's like for Sadiq Yusuf, hey, like I don't want to call it lucky, but would you rather fight Edson Barbosa at 37 or 34? It's like
Yeah.
he's getting away with one a little bit here. And then as far as a prediction goes, how do you see this fight going down?
My heart says I want to go with Edson Barbosa, but head says honestly I see the big age difference. I think Sadiq Yusuf sure hasn't fought the toughest guy in his last couple outings. Alex Carreras, still one of my favorite fighters just because of his style, and that was his win 2 fights ago for Sadiq. Lost to Arnold Allen, who I'm also a fan of. So I think he's been fighting better guys as of late. I do think Edson Barbosa's age might show in this one, so I do have Sadiq Yusuf winning this. Can't
Yeah.
decide if it's going to be a finish or go to decision because Barbosa's a tough dude.
Mm-hmm. I have Sadiq as well. I just think that like if you can put Barbosa on the back foot, take some of the kicks away, make it more of a boxing match. The only problem I have with Sadiq is that he's a little chinny. He's only been, I believe he was knocked out once in his career.
Yeah.
But it's like in the Arnold Allen fight, he lost the first round, very competitive first round, but Allen hit him and he gets wobbled a little bit. So Allen wins the round. Close round probably would have been Allen's anyways. Sadiq wins 4 minutes and 30 seconds of the second round. Allen hits him with the head kick in probably around the 2-minute mark. And Sadiq is wobbled and falling over, and he rightfully loses that round. But it's like things like that, that is concerning to see, even if you're surviving in those moments and recovering well. I still don't like seeing guys get wobbled on occasion. So I'm a little bit concerned there. But I think he's got better cardio. I think he could grapple early. And I think, the logic that we had last week with Joe Pyfer going out and grappling Abdul Razak Al Hassan, I think Sadiq's the better grappler. Great front chokes. I think he may go out there and grapple Edson early, get him tired, get some of the explosiveness gone, and then capitalize later with a submission or maybe a knockout. So I've got a finish here for Sadiq. And I think he either just lands. He hits hard. I think he either lands a big shot or finds a submission here. So I think he finishes him. I picked knockout, I believe, but a submission would not shock me in the slightest.
No.
All right, moving down to the co-main event. Not as fun of a fight in the co-main event, with all due respect. We've got Jennifer Maia and Viviane Araújo. I don't know why this is the co-main event. I disagree with the UFC's bout ordering sometimes. Regardless, not an awful fight here. Viviane Araújo, Jennifer Maia. Viviane's been struggling. Jennifer's been winning, but they are in similar spots of the division. Jerry, how do you view this fight?
Yeah, what you said right there is the fact that is what I've been looking at in this fight is Viviana has lost her last two. Sure, there's Amanda Ribas and Alexia Grasso. Grasso is still the champion, whether it was a draw or not. Different story that we've had in the past. Still the champion of this division. So that alone, it's not like they're bad losses. Beat Andrea Lee, lost to Caitlin Chukagian, who also beat Jennifer Maia in her second to last loss, who Maia, on the other hand, came in decision wins against Casey O'Neill, Myra Ramirez. To me, anytime Jennifer Maia fights, I'm not overly that thrilled. It seems like it usually goes to a decision one way or another, and it's one of those that kind of whoever gets maybe a takedown or causes a little more damage gets the win. It's from my memory, they haven't really been the most exciting fights. So, like you said, kind of surprised this is the co-main, but hey, I'll still watch it. Still should be entertaining one way or another.
Yeah, I'll keep my thoughts on this fight a little bit shorter. I've got Maia. I think she's a slightly better boxer. I think she's got better cardio, so I think she just throws a little bit more volume, lands a few more shots, wins 2 of the rounds. But Araujo, very dangerous, underrated grappler, hits hard. I've liked Araujo in the past. I think I picked her in her last 2 fights that she lost. So if she wins this fight and I pick against her, I'm going to be upset. But that's more on me than anyone else.
Yeah, and I mean, like I said, I'm sticking with Maya. Her all 11 of her fights in the UFC have gone to decision. I have her winning a decision here. Probably kind of what you said. She'll strike a little bit better on the feet, avoid the takedowns, and it's also pretty much all but one of Viviana Araujo's fights in the UFC have also gone to decision. The only one that didn't was her first one. That was the knockout 48 seconds into the third round. Decision, Jennifer Maia. That's all I have to say about it.
Yep. All right, moving down to a fight that I like a lot more and think this should probably be the co-main event. Jonathan Martinez and Adrian Yanez. These are 2 great prospects. Martinez, great leg kicks to the body, kicks to the head. He's really, you don't want to get kicked by Jonathan Martinez. I'll just leave it at that. Winning his last fight over Said Nurmagomedov, that's a great win. Meanwhile, Adrian Yanez, great prospect, but he got stopped by Rob Font in his last fight. Now he's looking to get back on the horse this time around. Jay, what are your thoughts heading into this prospect versus prospect matchup?
I like it. I think this one's going to be a battle. Like you said, these are 2 guys that go out looking for finishes. Sure, Martinez came off anytime you beat a Nurmagomedov, it seems like a big win. Sure, Said still fighting. He's not on this. He's on next week's card on the pay-per-view side of things, so that's a good win for him. Last time out, Adrian Yanez lost to Rob Font in his last fight. That was kind of a very impressive showing by Rob Font, so not going to knock Yanez for anything about that. Before that, he'd won a lot of 5 out of his 6 previous fights by knockout or TKO. He's going to come looking for it. I do want to lean slightly to Yanez's side, but it's hard to knock a guy who's on a 5-fight win streak in Jonathan Martinez. Either way, this fight's just going to be a blast. This is the one I think should be the co-main personally, but.
Yep. I think this is going to be a great fight too. The way that I kind of broke it down in the preview was there's going to be 3 ranges in this fight. You got your kicking range, your boxing range, and your clinch. In the clinch, Martinez has the knees and elbow advantage. Boxing range, Yanez is a 10 times better boxer, offensively and defensively. Kicking range, Martinez has great kicks. Whoever can manage the range the best wins this fight. Really hard to say. I think the betting odds are practically dead even. But I'm leaning Yanez just because he hits so hard that it's going to take him. He can fight at boxing range less often and still win this fight because of his power. And he's also very good at range management. So those are kind of some of the things I'm leaning towards that lean me towards Yanez in a fight that is going to, in my opinion, be close, competitive, and exciting.
Oh, yeah.
All right. Moving down one more fight. Michel Pereira, Andre Petrovsky. This is Pereira's debut at 185 pounds. You mentioned this fight a little bit earlier as one that you're looking forward to, so I'll let you take the reins on this one.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, it's going to be interesting to see Michel Pereira moving up a division. It was over the summer. He's meant to fight Wonderboy Thompson. Came in a little bit overweight there. I think it was 3 pounds over the weight limit. Weighed in at 174. Not ideal there, but now moving up and fighting a guy in Petrovsky who has been on a winning streak since joining the UFC. It's 5-0 in the UFC since coming off his Ultimate Fighter performance. Got a decent win out last time against Gerald Meerschaert, who's a very good grappler in his own right. Petrovsky is also that kind of grappling guy. He does a lot of professional grappling bouts, I believe. It's going to be a battle of kind of styles because if it's the Pereira I'm thinking of, he's the one who does like the crazy cartwheel kicks and yeah. So much more of a stand-up guy against Petrovsky, who's kind of a grappler, wrestler style. It's going to be that clash of styles, and I'm just excited because anytime Pereira's fighting, he's going to throw some sort of ridiculous kick one way or another. But that is something that maybe he won't be as athletic, as agile moving up to the 185 division.
Yeah, I'm interested to see how Pereira looks at 185, just because he's always had such a big size advantage at 170. I'm interested to see what he fights like with more size parity. It may be great, it may be bad. Maybe it's a mix of both. Maybe there's some positives, some negatives. I'm just interested to see what it looks like. He's also a guy that has struggled with cardio in the past. I'm interested to see how that looks going forward. You can have two sides of that. The weight cut doesn't affect you as much, and you have better cardio, or you're carrying extra body weight and you have worse cardio. So I think we can be looking at both sides of that. So I'm interested to see how he adjusts to this division. And Petrosky, in my opinion, is a better grappler than anyone Pereira has ever fought. You just do a skim of Pereira's record, you see a lot of strikers, whether it be Santiago Ponzinibbio, Andre Fialho, Danny Roberts, quite a few other. He's fought quite a few guys, but most of them are primarily strikers and guys that are looking to strike. Now he's got Petrosky, a dude who was a great high school wrestler, got a scholarship to UNC. So he wrestled D1 for 2 years, then went the JUCO route, I believe, or maybe it was D2. But, he wrestled for 4 years in college, and he's gone out and submitted guys with front chokes. So he's got a pretty well-rounded grappling game. So, like you said, this is a big clash of styles. I'm going to take a swing on the underdog in Petrosky. I just think that, hey, it's a new weight class, and you're fighting the best grappler you've ever fought in your career. I think Pereira can win, but I'm just taking the stab on the underdog here. This is one of my underdog picks, just because he's got a few things that historically can lead to losses that he's going up against. Doesn't mean he can't win because he is talented, but I'm picking against him here.
Yeah, it's one of the ones that I kind of can see Pereira winning. He does have some 7 submission wins. One of his wins on his 5-fight win streak was a rear naked choke. A lot of decisions otherwise recently. It's one that I'm more just curious to see how he is, and I'll really have my pick once I see the weigh-ins for this one, because see how he compares physically, because still, according to all the stats and information, he's an inch taller, same reach advantage as Petrosky, but it's that grappling aspect. And usually I tend to lean to the grapplers versus strikers in any sort of fight, especially one where you're moving up and fighting a guy who's been having success in your new division. Probably going to lean Petrosky by decision, but it's going to be one of those that it's a coin toss for when I'm sending over my predictions.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. It's a close fight. Like, Pereira is a dangerous striker. I wouldn't be shocked at all if he got the job done here. And at a minimum, we're going to learn a lot about what he looks like at 185 and what he looks like against grapplers. And I think those are two very good things moving on in the future.
I didn't realize how big of a favorite Pereira is, at least betting-wise at the moment, minus 230 to Petrosky's plus 160. So nice little shout there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then we are cutting up on the hour here. A couple other fights on the main card, but I say we stop it here and we go over our things to look out for on the rest of the card. So looking at the rest of the card, what's something that you are looking forward to, or something that you have questions about, whether it be the main event, whether it be the first fight of the night? What are you looking forward to?
On the prelim card, a fighter I'm looking forward to watching because I do think he's very entertaining. Seems to always end one way or another in a finish. 20 fights, 20 finishes, whether it's win or loss. Is Terrence McKinney. I'm excited to watch him fight. Came off a win in the first round of a TKO knockout of Mike Breeden last time out. This is also his 4th fight this calendar year. So impressive stuff there. Wants to be fighting, even with 2 losses to start the year. Bounce back with a win. Looking to make it 500 on the year. That's the guy I'm looking out for and excited to watch.
Yep. Terrence McKinney fights always fun. Win or lose for McKinney. I will keep it on the main card. I'll go Christian Rodriguez and Cameron Saaiman. Two prospects here. C-Rod coming off the win over Raul Rosas, and Cameron Saaiman, teammate of Dricus du Plessis, won a fight on Contender Series. He is undefeated in the UFC, several fights as well, I believe 3 or 4 in less than a year. So Cameron Saaiman has looked good in the UFC. And this is a 25-year-old prospect versus a 22-year-old prospect. And that is something that we don't really see that often. We don't really see prospect versus prospect too much, and we're seeing it twice on this card. So I'll shout those two guys out for that fight. And the winner will be in a position, a very good position, considering, two prospects going against each other. If you win, you're moving up that prospect ladder and gaining some traction. So that's going to be an important fight for both of those guys' careers.
Yeah, I remember watching, what was it, Simon's fight last time out, seeing that he was 21 or 22 at that point. I was like, damn, what am I doing with my life? I'm a year older. It's crazy seeing these young guys come up. Obviously, Raul Rosas, it's awesome. And I liked this Simon guy. He looked very good in his last fight out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think both these guys are good and have some solid skills as well. So that's one of the reasons that I like it too. These guys aren't just prospects that could flame out. I think both these guys have legit potential. So very impressed with both of them. But thank you to everyone who tuned in to the daily show today. We had a stacked episode, ton of topics. So thank you to everybody for tuning in as we kind of transitioned from card to card and threw in some drama in there as well. We got fights tomorrow, but we will be back next Friday, and we'll be talking even more in depth about UFC 294, the fights themselves, and how we see those fights going down, as well as some of the other fights on the card, because that is a good card with some more fights that are worth talking about. But subscribe to the show, and we will see you next week. Goodbye.